Mathias Cormann, welcome back to CNBC. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be back.
How is Australia contributing to the G20 action to fight the coronavirus and its associated economic impact?
Obviously, countries around the world are facing similar challenges. I mean, we're all dealing with the devastating impact of this global pandemic on our economies, on jobs, on livelihoods. As part of the G20, along with all the other countries around the world, I mean, we are putting forward what we think is required in order to maximize the strength of the economic recovery and the jobs recovery on the other side. And we're particularly focused on the need to restore jobs. And we are also very keen to see the G20 ensure that the global safety net arrangements are robust and available for developing economies, in particular those in our neighborhood, of course, here in the Asia Pacific. And we're also very keen to ensure that there is proper coordination globally when it comes to the exit out of these unbelievable crisis level, historically unprecedented levels of fiscal support into the economy. Support that's been necessary, but support that ultimately will have to be wound back given the fiscal constraints that all of us are dealing with.
The G20 appears to have put a particular focus on debt relief and suspension. Why do you think that this is the right focus for this group in this environment, or is it a missed opportunity to prioritise other economic acceleration, economic recovery measures?
Well, advanced economies and developed economies do have a responsibility in this current circumstance to provide relief and to provide increased fiscal capacity for less developed economies to be able to deal with the economic implications of this crisis. When this is a crisis that has hit advanced economies very hard, and obviously it has hit more vulnerable economies even harder. And so it is incumbent on all of us to look at what we can appropriately and sensibly do to ensure that everyone has the best possible opportunity to come out of this in reasonable shape on the other side.
You mentioned that the focus is going to be on jobs moving forward. Australia's unemployment rate hit 7.4% last week. That's its highest level in around 20 years. Is this what peak unemployment looks like in Australia, or is the worst yet to come?
Well, clearly the June quarter was always going to be the worst quarter for us. That's when most of the economic impact of the coronavirus here in Australia has been felt. Yes, I mean 7.4% is high for us, but it is not as high as we feared it would be. I mean, back in March, when we were looking ahead, our expectation was for an unemployment rate of about 10%. So it has come in quite a bit below that. And there are some encouraging signs. I mean, our participation rate has been going up again to 64%, 280,000 additional people going to the labour market. So the hours worked have gone up, underemployment has gone down, and indeed about 210,000 jobs have been restored into the economy. So we are quietly optimistic, pending of course getting on top of the outbreaks in Victoria and parts of New South Wales. I mean, that's the unknown, I guess, for the next quarter. But beyond that, the Australian economy has certainly yet again proven its resilience in the face of significant challenges.
And I know we are, 4 months into this pandemic, but do you also accept that, I guess unpacking what you just explained there, the economic and fiscal consequences of this are still yet to really play out, particularly given the fact that we see, as you say, cases spiking in Victoria and parts of New South Wales?
In Australia, both on the health front and on the economic front, we have fared comparatively well compared to what's been happening in other parts of the world. I mean, while every death is tragic and would rather be avoided. I mean, if you look at the death rate in Australia at about 4.5 per million, and you compare that with, the US, in excess of 400 deaths per million, and in the UK in excess of 660 deaths per million. So in Australia, on the health front, we're in relatively good shape, even with what's happening in Victoria, comparatively speaking. And on the economic front, the March quarter, 0.3% contraction in the March quarter compared to a 5.3% contraction, for example, in countries like France and Italy, 1.8% contraction that one quarter across OECD countries. So far, certainly what we feared would be the case now is certainly not. We're not in as bad a position as we'd feared. In fact, we are in a somewhat better position, and the outlook is better than what we thought it would be when we planned for this, for this crisis earlier this year.
And I know that forecasting anything at the moment is an incredible challenge for any economy, for any minister. But what is the July economic statement going to tell us about the state of the Australian economy and the state of the government's finances today? I know there's more than 2 million Australians looking for work right now. The government also on track for record deficits this year and next. Things aren't that good right now, right?
Well, look, I mean, the work that we've done over the last 6 years to repair the budget put us into a stronger position, a stronger fiscal position as we went into this crisis. I mean, we returned the budget to balance last financial year. We were on track for a surplus this financial year. But of course, I mean, the coronavirus crisis has hit our economy hard, and as such, it has hit our budget hard. I mean, we've had to make policy decisions with a fiscal impact of $56 billion, and that is just the decisions that we made. I mean, on top of that, there'll be the impact from the economic hit on revenue and expenditure across the board. So, I mean, we will be reconciling the impact of all of these things in our economic and fiscal update on Thursday. And it will also show the many measures that the government has taken to support the economy and to help fight this coronavirus crisis on the health front. I mean, people will be able to see how much all of that has cost us and what our expectations are into the future. But accepting what you've just said, there is a high degree of uncertainty, of course, when it comes to making predictions, in both directions, incidentally. I mean, the outlook right now is better than what we'd feared earlier this year. And some of the costings that we made for some programs like JobKeeper at the beginning turned out to be less costly than initially anticipated.
Is additional stimulus going to be necessary in the second half of the year or early 2021?
Well, we'll continue to make decisions to sensibly and responsibly manage the transition into the new normal. I mean, clearly, what we've put in place for the initial 6-month period was historically unprecedented crisis-level support. We won't be able to afford to do that on an ongoing basis over the medium to long term. So there will have to be a transition, and ultimately businesses will have to make judgments on what the right size and the right positioning is for them in the new economic context from which to grow. But I mean, there will be a further period of support for those businesses who really need it. I mean, not all businesses are in the same situation. Some businesses have been able to recover somewhat, but those businesses that continue to be on the front line of the economic impact of this crisis will continue to get some support for some further period.
And as it relates to the JobKeeper and JobSeeker subsidies, obviously these have been very successful. They've been well received in Australia, but there is concern that they would be perhaps right-sized or tapered back post-September. What's your expectations for these subsidies, and is it likely that they will have to be right-sized or they will have to be tapered back in order for Australia to meet the economic realities of its current situation?
Well, the initial JobKeeper and JobSeeker arrangements were put in place for 6 months, and we always said that we would reassess in good time before we reach the end of that 6-month period. I mean, that's what we're doing, and the specifics of all of that will be announced in the economic statement on Thursday. But by way of general comment, what we will continue to ensure is that support provided is targeted towards those businesses and those sectors of the economy that genuinely need it. When JobKeeper was first put in place, any business that qualified back in March, early April, remained inside the program and remained eligible irrespective of what happened to their turnover over that 6-month period. So even if there was recovery, they remained eligible to receive JobKeeper. But there will have to be a level of reassessment to ensure that the fiscal support provided by the government genuinely goes to those businesses that genuinely need it.
Mathias, when it comes to the second half of the year, how are you reading the state of the global economy right now? And are you concerned that perhaps as we see stimulus measures and measures like those that you're talking about starting to be rolled back, are we on track for what could be a taper tantrum perhaps as we head into the new year?
Well, look, I mean, that is why it is Australia's position within the G20 that there has to be a globally coordinated approach to the exit from this transitional fiscal support into all of our economies. I mean, it's certainly true that there is a risk here, and it's a risk that we've got to be mindful of and that we've got to manage. But by the same token, we do need to get ourselves back into a situation where viable and profitable businesses pay for the wages of their employees, for example, out of their income, rather than on the basis of taxpayer support. So, I mean, it's not going to be fiscally sustainable to provide the sort of fiscal support at the same level as governments around the world are currently providing it on an ongoing basis. There will have to be a transition into the new normal. And yes, I mean, of course, we've got to try and manage that transition out of the transition as sensibly as possible. But nevertheless, over time, we will have to allow businesses to adjust. We've got to allow the market to operate, and for us to figure out which businesses are going to be viable into the future, which jobs are going to be real jobs into the future. And we've got to make sure that along the way we support individual people as best we can through that transition.
Mathias Cormann, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Always good to talk to you.